To the scores of pro-Hamas, anti-Israel protests that we're watching happen in cities here in the U.S. and across the world. The mayor says we are not all right, but the sentiment may go beyond the current state of emotional and psychological conditions for Americans. The recent surprise attacks by Hamas still has Israel and close allies in a bit of shock, scratching heads at how such a breach could happen against one of the most fortified national borders in the world. And just this week at our southern border, 2 Lebanese nationals were apprehended amid terror concerns. So the question now, how not all right are we? Let's bring in former Associate White House Counsel to President George W. Bush, Jamil Jaffer. Jamil, good to see you again. Thanks for joining us. You know, when you look at the protests happening, not just in our country, but around the world, what are your biggest concerns? I know that I believe the Louvre Museum in Paris was closed over this. We've got Jewish communities that feel very unsafe. You look at this, and what is your top concern?
Well, actually, it's obviously hugely troubling. After the U.S. was attacked on 9/11, we lost 3,000 Americans nearly that day. And the world rallied in support of us. Nobody rallied in support of ISIS or on the time Al-Qaeda, which eventually became ISIS in part. Instead, the world rallied around us and the justice of our cause. Now we see what's happening in Israel, another terrorist group, a group that's been labeled a terrorist group by the United States since the late 90s, conducting a massive attack on Israel, the equivalent of which on a population basis would be roughly between 10 to 16 9/11s in one moment. And you see people rallying around those who conduct the attack. There can be no defense of Hamas. And so to see these protests taking place in America, on our streets, on the streets of Europe, look, it's one thing to have concerns about the Palestinian cause. It's another thing to support a terrorist group that killed 1,300 people in one go of a population of 9 million in Israel.
Yeah, and people are very anxious and afraid that this is going to spiral and wondering how in the world there could have been such an intelligence failure here in the U.S. to not have seen this coming, to not have been able to alert our ally, our strongest ally in the Mideast, that this might be coming. I want to ask you about the moves the administration is making right now, moving that second carrier strike group closer to Israel in the Mediterranean. But our Jackie Heinrich, our White House reporter, is reporting that the administration is actually asking Israel to delay this ground invasion until those humanitarian corridors are open. A U.S. official sort of pushing back on that, saying that they have not asked Israel to slow down. What do you make of the moves that this administration has made in recent days? And in totality, has it helped make Americans feel any safer?
Well, look, I think the administration has done a pretty good job, actually, putting in strong statements, making clear our support of Israel, the calling this what it is, a terrorist attack, and sending forces to the Gulf. Now, we're going to need to be supplying Israel with a lot more capabilities. We're going to need to be supplying them with weapons to fight this war and to ultimately take out and destroy Hamas, rip it to the ground, because the Israelis can't accept another attack like this. It's just unsustainable. And as a result, Hamas will be taken to the ground. Now, the challenge, of course, as you point out, and the Israelis recognize, is that you have millions of Palestinians in that northern area of Gaza where they're planning on operating here in the next day or two. And the administration, if it is asking the Israelis to slow down, it's interesting that they're saying they're not. It's ultimately going to be Israel's call about whether and when they go. It's actually kind of amazing that they've provided any notice that they're going in to at least allow people to move out. You've got about 1 million people moving south. There is sort of a border where the Israelis, I think, at least for now, are going to stop. And the real question is, why aren't dual nationals and Americans and the like, and if necessary, Palestinians being let out of Rafah into Egypt?
Yeah, it's a scary thought. I mean, you've got Americans, dual citizens that are stuck there wondering, what the State Department is doing. I'm sure there's some back channel talking with Egypt, but we don't have answers right now. That Rafah border is still closed. Jamil Jaffer, thank you so much for joining us. We hope to have you back. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Aisha.